Great. Well, thanks for taking some time this afternoon to talk about your experiences of demonstrating smart local energy system through the Prospering for the Energy Revolution programme. So we're going to start off and talk about your experiences and why it has been so important to do demonstration. And the first thing I'd like you to do is just to introduce yourself and your role and briefly mention the name of your project. So Malcolm.
So my name is Malcolm McCulloch. I'm a professor in the Department of Engineering Science in the University of Oxford, and my role in Project Leo was the lead academic and helping provide some of the innovation to drive it forward.
Thank you. And Tim?
I'm Tim Rose. I'm the project lead for the Energy Superhub Oxford project, and I've worked for EDF Renewables, who are the lead partner in that project.
Thank you. And Gareth?
Gareth Davies. I'm CEO of Aquaterra Group, and Aquaterra is one of the partners in the ReFLEX project in Orkney, and we were specifically responsible for setting up the commercial customer entity ReFLEX Orkney as part of that project.
Would you start off for us, Gareth, and tell us a little bit more about Project ReFLEX and what you've done on Orkney?
So ReFLEX was really born out of, I guess, 20 years of experience of the, if you like, the old energy system, and we've been working towards carbon transition in the islands over that 20 years. In 2013, we reached the point where we have over 100% of our electrical demand coming from renewables, so that's fantastic. But that was only part of the journey. What we realized is that our total energy use is dominated by hydrocarbons still, and our electricity only accounts for 15% of our total energy demand. So we still had 85% of the job to do. So when the PIFA call came along, we saw this as an opportunity to look at our whole energy system within Orkney and think about how we could accelerate decarbonisation. And we wanted to try and get there by 2030. We've been a community that's been ahead of the game, if you like, and so that felt like a target that was reasonable. So ReFLEX was really born out of that and answering the question, how do we achieve that momentous change in our energy system? And we had ideas around electricity, around heat, around transport, and how those could be integrated within a package and involve flexibility and adaptation to a decarbonised state, basically.
And so you mentioned heat and transport or mobility as key elements of energy demand. So what have you delivered or demonstrated through ReFLEX in terms of bringing those together as part of a whole energy system?
So what we've realised is that it's very difficult to bring those things together, but we knew that at the start, which is why it hadn't been done before, frankly. So by creating ReFLEX Orkney as an umbrella organisation, that was one of our key moves. So we have an entity that's a one-stop shop effectively for energy customers, whether they're public, business or organisational in our community. And that one-stop shop is a place where people can come and get advice, or through which in time they'll be able to access a set of services that lead to decarbonisation of each of those vectors. When we got into the project, we started realising some of the barriers and obstacles that there are within the system, but what we found is that the transport space was where we could make most progress most easily. And so for the first couple of years, we focused upon introducing EVs within the community to a greater extent and providing flexibility services associated with EV charging. And now we're just getting to the stage where we're adding some of the heat and other power opportunities alongside the transport.
And you've engaged with a huge fraction of your community. I think in terms of the fraction, the percentage of Orkney population, other projects would sort of die for the level of engagement. What is it?
So yeah, so we wanted ReFLEX Orkney to be a trusted partner for the community, and so we developed a membership model where people are invited from within the community to become members of ReFLEX, and then as they need particular services they can become a customer of ReFLEX. So we have just on 1,000 members at the present time, so that's 10% of our households. We have 10,000 households in Orkney, and around 400 of those members have now transacted as customers in some way as well.
So moving on to you, Tim, you've been involved in the ESO project around Oxford. So could you tell us what's at the heart of that project and what it's done over the past few years?
Yeah, The ESO projects are different from the other projects actually that we're talking about here, and also the detailed design projects, in that it's connected to the transmission network. So we're connected directly into the main 400 kV overhead lines of National Grid, and that allows us to do some things differently. But like the others, it's focused on power, transport and heat. And the objectives of those areas are really, firstly, in the power side, to enable more renewables on the grid, and that's all about helping the flexibility of the network, really more at the regional and national level. So we're doing that by constructing a very large battery, which is used to do two things. It can provide services to the national grid to help balance the frequency of the grid, and it can also trade on the energy markets. And then the second thing, in transport, we're building a private piece of infrastructure, a private cable, to one of the park and rides in Oxford, and that's to power what's currently the UK's largest EV charging hub. And what's exciting about that is that being connected directly to the national grid, to the overheads, you can provide significant amounts of power for ultra-rapid charging, and that's a model that is going to be a very important one of the models for EV charging going forward.
And that's an idea which has come up in a couple of places in the PIFA programme, the link between the national and the local energy system, and your project seems to embody that to a degree. So what would you say is the big benefit to the local community of the infrastructure you've delivered, and how does that link it to the national infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, the two areas where there's a benefit to the local community are, one, in that charging hub that we've built. So that's really offering local users, as well as people driving through the county and coming and visiting the city, to be able to use that charging hub to charge their vehicles. And that's a core part of Oxford's city's electric vehicle strategy, which was also funded under this project. So and their EV strategy will contain domestic charging and destination charging, as well as these sort of rapid hubs. And the second part is heat, and I didn't mention that, but this is the third part of our project, which is the heat vector, which is installing ground source heat pumps in social housing residents in the south of the city, and we've installed ground source heat pumps in some 60 properties there. So very a different scale to the transmission connected pieces, which is the transport and the power. This is really about helping those specific residents improve their energy bills and their comfort levels in their properties.
So moving on to you, Malcolm, you've also been working on a project in Oxfordshire, but a very different one. Do you want to tell us about Project Leo?
Yeah, so Leo stands for Local Energy Oxfordshire, and unlike Tim, we actually connect into the DNO space, and our local DNO, SSEN, is a partner in the project and has been really instrumental in facilitating the work that we've been doing. We've basically been concentrating on three different aspects. The first one is a local flexibility market to enable flexibility within the secondary or primary substation. So just to explain, the secondary substation is basically where you connect from the local transformer directly to your home, and typically we're looking at several hundred homes connected to that. The primary transformer is the next stage up, and that's looking probably at connecting a few thousand homes together. So we're looking to say, how do we create a flexibility market so that as we start to put in more heat pumps and EVs and the like, that we can still use those networks for as long as possible without having to dig up the roads to upgrade them. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is been looking at a local area energy plans. And so we've been working on looking in Ensham, where there's a new area, there's a lot more development going in, and to say, how do we plan not only for that new development, but how can we use that development to actually enable decarbonisation of the existing infrastructure and the existing homes, and playing that together. And that's been really interesting in the work that they've been doing there, and that's mainly with the County Council and the City Council, looking at how do we use mapping tools to help with that, and then also detailed discussions and co-design with Low Carbon Hub and the local communities to make sure that that's a plan that they're comfortable with and actually help co-create, which is fantastic. The third aspect is smart and fair neighbourhoods, which is basically looking at different archetypes within Oxfordshire. So we've got everything from new build through to off-gas networks and urban environments and social housing, all these different types of neighbourhoods which are each are an archetype of what neighbourhoods anywhere around the UK would look like. And then working very closely with those participants to actually understand what are the energy needs and requirements, and then from that and their aspirations as we move towards a zero carbon future, and then working with them to say, okay, what is the right set of processes they need to enable them to develop on that and to actually deploy those types of activities.
Yeah, I could pick a number of things in all of those main areas, but I think the thing that I will choose is the Superhub itself. So, and the reason I'll choose that is because it's highly collaborative. So this was the area where we, EDF Renewables as the lead, were working hand in hand with Oxford City Council and with support of the university also, but to deliver this really unique charging hub in one of the park and rides. And it's interesting for a number of reasons. It really certainly challenged the skills and capabilities, particularly within the council, but also ourselves, to understand how we were going to provide this new piece of infrastructure. Complex because it has not one but 3 charge point operators offering their services there. The land is owned by the council. So there's a sort of concession contract arrangement. The council has releases the land out to those providers. So there are multiple business models at play here. The council has its own business model. The charge point operators have their business model. We, as the provider of the infrastructure, have our own business model. It's a very complex thing to pull together, and physically very complex to deliver. And this is, I think, an interesting learning point for local energy systems like this. Generally, that we really, called on skills and resources that the council hadn't used before. It certainly challenged them. It challenged us all in the programme and how we went about structuring the design and the build of that charging hub. So I think lots of lessons about knowing what sort of skills are needed, particularly with the council and how the council interfaces with industry in delivering these sort of things. So that was a fascinating and very challenging part of the process. And we had some quite substantial regulatory challenges to overcome to be able to go ahead and invest in that project as well. So all in all, a big and very fascinating but challenging piece of the project.
So I guess normally when a single charge point provider sets up a charging hub, do they normally own and operate everything themselves? So is it just an internal single organisation project?
Normally, if it was a single charge point operator will have a hub at a location, they'll usually connect to the distribution network. So the distribution network operator will provide them with a connection, and they can then offer their own business model and sell their energy, install their units and sell at a certain price. For us, because we're providing the infrastructure, the cable, this private cable to that charging hub, we had to put our own substation in, and then we have to divide that, the power, if you like, between 3 different charge point operators, have arrangements with each of those. So it's a different model. And some other interesting challenges. Metering is very different when you start talking about connecting to the national grid network as opposed to the distribution network. Lots and lots of little things that we had to overcome.
And what's the benefit of having the multiple charge point providers there? So you add to the complexity of the project, but what comes out of that? Why is it better to have that type of model at the end? I
think it's a range of different opportunities really for the customer. So we have a range of charging speeds from ultra rapid down to what we call fast charging, but is really slower charging. So there are opportunities to come and park your car and use the park and ride as a park and ride, go in for the day into the Oxford City, but charge your car while you're doing that for several hours, 5 hours or something. And then other people are coming in off the A34 and literally charging in 15 minutes and getting on their way. So it's having a range of different options and catering for different needs. So that's why we've done it differently that way.
And I guess, were the challenges that you came across, could you foresee them when you started the project, or were they things that kind of came up as you went along?
Yeah, lots of things that came up as we went along. And I think this aspect of the project was not that well defined at the beginning. Certainly the demonstration in all areas, I mean, we've been talking about the Superhub itself, the charging hub, but the battery as well, all the way along through the planning process, the financing, the regulatory challenges that I alluded to. All of these things were things that we couldn't really foresee, let alone, let's talk about COVID. So that obviously put a major spanner in the works for everything, particularly the heat piece, where we were not, really working with the residents in those properties. So in some areas this all came to a stop. In other areas we were able to work around it. But so I think there was some real resilience learning in terms of how you can manage a project like that through a lot of roller coaster really over a course of 4 years. So we definitely wouldn't have been able to learn those lessons if we hadn't actually built it.
Moving on to Orkney, so you've faced challenges associated with regulatory barriers, with all sorts of things, but you've got a really good project at the end of the day that is, as you said earlier, bringing together different elements of the energy system. So which bit of your demonstration would you pick out as an example of where we've learnt from doing?
Yeah, I think actually it's interesting to build on what was just talked about in Oxford, where there was a focus on the charging infrastructure. In our transport area, we have quite good charging infrastructure on the islands already. And so our main focus was to lift the participation in EV ownership. And we thought quite a lot about how we were going to do that. And what we wanted to do was try and make it more affordable for people. And so we followed a leasing model. And teamed up with a company, Drive Electric, which is a UK supplier, and we were able to offer a local service with a kind of drop-in service for the customers. And what was absolutely key to that is that we had test vehicles that people could drive. So we had 7 different models of EVs that people could come and sit in, and when COVID allowed, they could have a test drive. And that was absolutely key to success, because what we found is that half the people that sat in an EV and drove it then subsequently leased it. So we had a turnover rate or a conversion rate of 50%, which in any retail setting or service selling setting is remarkable. So that was really key to the success of getting the uptake in the EVs. And the reason we wanted to do that was to increase the battery capacity on the system. And many of those households took on smart charging systems, which we could then interface with our FlexiGrid control system within the ReFLEX to allow for that recharging of batteries to take place at the right time, from a grid management point of view. So I think that journey of helping people within the community see that EVs were something that they could aspire to, providing it in an affordable way, and then using that uptake of the new technology to provide greater flexibility was important. One of the unique features of Orkney is that we work under what we call an active network management system. And that was actually a bit of a disadvantage to us in terms of the flexibility management side, because it meant that there were further constraints and controls on how those batteries could be integrated into the energy system. And that's kind of work that we still have to resolve with the network operator, in the future. But yeah, that was I think one good example of what we did.
And I think one of the things I was surprised about when I was reading your project reports was the complexity of a customer's journey who wants to buy an EV and participate and benefit from smart charging. And obviously that was something you were looking at. What have you learned about that customer journey and how to support customers through it?
No, it's absolutely become a huge part of it. And I think when ReFLEX was first born as an idea, it was thought of as a technical load management, load shifting idea. But the implementation of that then requires engagement of the customers, it involves engagement of the network management system, and in particular through the last 4 years, it's not just the customers, it's the supply of materials, and I'm sure all the projects have had problems with the supply chain. So when we started ReFLEX, you could supply an EV within 2 weeks. It's got as bad as 9 months through the COVID, and then the problems with the Ukraine war, which has also compounded the supply chain issues. So those have been some of the challenges that have come with that. But what we also wanted to do is to make sure that the customer had a one-stop shop, as I said earlier, that they could come into to get the support they needed for being aware of what types of EVs were available, what might be suitable to their pattern of use, when the EV is delivered, getting the training so that they can charge and they understand how it works, and then giving them an ongoing service as they use the EV as well. And alongside the leasing options, we also have a co-wheels car sharing option as well. And we've also introduced recently a second-hand EV option where people can be accessing lower cost vehicles, because what we want to do is make that EV use a more egalitarian solution spread throughout the community. Not everybody can afford to lease even a new car, but when it comes to a second-hand car, that makes it more affordable to people. And then the final bit is community participation in mobility. Orkney is an archipelago of islands, and we were able to put mobility solutions such as minibuses into communities where there was a particular opportunity to do that, and so that's helped with community mobility as well.
Okay, so it's interesting that both you and Tim were talking about quite technical energy projects, but some of the big challenges are not necessarily energy. It's contracts, there's customer journeys, there's supply chains and things like that. So moving on to you, Malcolm, have you had a similar experience where the challenges and issues associated with delivery are energy, but also beyond energy?
Yeah, I think the commonality that we have is that we're all creating a new system. And so there's not a standard way, there's no process there of saying how to do it. I'm sure when you guys started, there's no handbook, there's no textbook on how to do stuff. And so when you're starting a new system, the big challenge that we've all faced is the uncertainties and the unknown unknowns. I mean, how many of those unknown unknowns have kicked us in the teeth and then we've had to get up and start walking again? So what we did very early on was actually develop a process where we actively explored those unknown unknowns and to actually work through things. And we recognized that in a system, you can get very complex very quickly, but dealing with the complexity and unknown unknowns at the same time gets extremely challenging. So we simplified down the system a lot, and we created a minimum viable system approach to actually deal with that. And that allowed us to unpick those unknowns very quickly and knock them over the head so we could actually rapidly progress. And so some of the examples that we had, just a trivial example, but an important one, is that we were trying to do flexibility events, and one of them was 15 minutes late. Still delivered all the energy, did everything else, but nobody knew, okay, what does that mean? Did they deliver it or not deliver it, or did they partially deliver it? So we then had a whole framework of thinking to say, okay, how do we actually reward people to do partial delivery, because partial delivery is better than no delivery. And that's one of the examples that we've done. And a similar thing with our mapping tools. It got to the point where, yes, we could show what the traditional components within a council mapping tool would look like, but we needed to know how congested is the network at different places. So we now built that into it, so we can now put into, say, in this area here, let's say if we want to drop in 30 heat pumps, can the network take it or not? So it's that learning by doing and doing it in the wild. And in the wild, it's, it means there's lots of challenges around that, but you then get to know what's really going to work and what really doesn't work.
Yeah. And you've obviously, in the wild, brought together organisations and infrastructure that doesn't normally engage flexibly with the energy system.
Absolutely.
With the needs of a distribution network company, for example. Can you say a little bit about how those two sides have meshed and how you've helped them to interact effectively?
Yeah, so really early on in our process, we recognized that there was different worldviews of what the world should look like. And so what we did is we brought everybody together in a room for a day. And one of the key tasks we worked through was to identify what is the key social need that we wanted to do in LEO. And what was surprising is everybody expected somebody else to say something completely different, but actually there was a large amount of consensus, which everybody was shocked at because they weren't expecting it to be such a level of consensus. And that really helped us later on, because when things didn't work, like the targeted charge review kicked us, and other things, and supply chains got really long, having a clear understanding of all the participants, what that final goal was going to be, meant we can work around that and maybe change our processes and how we're going to do it, but we're still delivering that same thing. So, and that sharing has really helped a lot. And as I mentioned earlier on, is that, for instance, the mapping tool which the local authority did together with the DNO, that would never happen in another context because they weren't aware that that would have been a useful thing to do.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's a really good takeaway for me, is that kind of trying to make sure that the project and the diversity of participants has that shared worldview.
Absolutely. And that's often where you see where systems go wrong, is because significant partners don't share that same worldview.
Yeah, and maybe even don't recognise that they don't share it.
Exactly, and that's kind of key. And to me, one thing is that if you're going to be doing a systems innovation project, really make sure that you can get a consistent worldview, that everybody knows what the desired outcome is. You might differ on what each role is going to be and all the rest of it, but that's fine, but just get that shared outcome. And then don't be scared of doing simple manual processes to prove the interactions between the different bodies, so that you can make sure that each organization has a clear understanding what their role is and what the role they can expect from others.
Great. So just to finish off then, it would be lovely to hear from you as to what would be your kind of key message to give to the next generation of innovation projects. What's the one thing that you've experienced or that you've learned that you would say this is really important for the next smart local energy project that is looking to deliver? So shall we start with you, Gareth? Yeah,
I might just reframe that question a little bit if I may, because I think that I think all the projects would probably attest to this, is that what we discovered is the huge complexity of an integrated energy system. And I think, as you said, the number of things that can go wrong and the diversity of that is incredible. Likewise, the number of wins and the things that can go right are huge as well. The prize is huge, so it's going to be naturally challenging. But I think that the imperative that we're all under, the reason that this program exists is because we need to change our energy system. We know that our existing energy system is not fit for purpose going forward, so it has to change. Change is difficult. There's lots of inertia, there's lots of vested interest, there's lots of things and people that frankly don't want to change. So it's not surprising that us as projects which are bringing change come across those obstacles. So for me, I would say the most important thing for the next generation of projects is to engage with this learning. And it can't be one lesson picked out of a list of 100. I think it needs to be a deeper and more meaningful engagement process. But the 4 years of learning that we've had, the intensity of it through the particular challenges that we all faced post-Brexit, with COVID, with the war, with the energy crisis, hopefully that kind of intensity will never get repeated. But I think the intensity of learning that we all share will be very difficult to match. And so what we need to do is find ways of allowing that learning to be shared in its totality.
Yeah. So your one thing is there isn't one thing really.
Exactly.
You need to pick everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Tim?
Yeah, well, I'd support that message as well. Lots and lots of lessons across a wide range of different topics. I think the thing that comes through to me as really important, and I think particularly for future local authorities trying to do this sort of thing, because I think the local authorities are pretty much going to be there in all of these sort of systems and pretty central. These are highly collaborative projects, and from that point of view, they're quite complex because they're collaborative in the sense of as I mentioned, different business models, but different sort of commercial approaches, and very different commercial approaches or contractual approaches to how you get things done, and that creates different speeds of the ability to move quickly and how you could do that, and I think has definitely flagged up for us where some of those skills and resources just they're either there or they're not there. They're not there. If they're there, they certainly need strengthening. So there's a lot. I think people should be really looking, trying to nail down what they can at the beginning, but then really do some thinking, particularly from a local authority point of view, about the sort of some key strategic decisions and making sure you've got the skills and resources to do that sort of thing. So that's very important, I think, for us. And I think, to come back to Gareth's point, therefore having sort of a learning database and ideally a knowledge base, and instill people who can help local authorities who are going to engage in this sort of thing, help them roll it out. And I think we don't want to lose that learning.
And that role of local authority seems really important in anything of this type.
Yeah, I don't think it can be done without. But local authorities and private businesses like the one I've been working for, we work in different ways and at different speeds, and you need to recognise that at the beginning, because it needs some sort of thinking about and preparation to ensure that you get your outcome.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And Malcolm, do you have one thing?
Yeah. So I would just say that if you're doing a systems innovation project like the ones we've been doing, is recognize that your plan is never right. It's going to have some serious flaws in it, but build in a process so that you can learn and adapt the plan as you're going along. And make sure that you have one, if it's funded through Innovate UK or the like, make sure you have one work package, which is the whole system as itself, where everybody interacts and feeds into. Otherwise, you're going to have disparate parties looking at the parts of the system in a different way, and you're going to have real trouble fixing it up.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That was really interesting. And I look forward to seeing the next round of innovation projects, and hopefully we can all be involved in those. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Simon.